Hello and welcome to this SlimDevOps Live episode 40. Hello again, Pete.
Hey, Martin, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. So, if you're watching this after the fact, this was originally streamed live on twitch.tv/SlimDevOps. So if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to join in interactively, then head over to twitch.tv/SlimDevOps and give us a follow there. Right then, we've got a few friends in the chat already. Welcome one, welcome all. Thank you very much for joining us. So what's new with you, Pete? What have you been up to?
Ooh, yeah, we got a heck of a lot going on. I have been working on some of our DockerCon talks. So I've been playing the role of video editor, which I'm not great at, but I enjoy doing. And yeah, it's been fun. We actually have two talks that are going to be part of DockerCon. So we're a platinum sponsor this year, and Evan from our dev team, who most people know in the chat, is going to be doing a walkthrough of creating production-ready containers and showing off some of our new Docker extension, which he's shown off here before. So that's pretty cool. And then the PaymentWorks team is actually joining us as well. They talked with Josh about some really cool, honestly, like some really cool use cases that they figured out from the Docker extension. Matthias, their VP of engineering, we asked him if he would join and didn't even know that he had been using the extension, and he actually had some real world use cases. So super cool talks, and we're very excited for that. We're all over the world. Lindsay's going to be at DevOps Days Denver next week, or DevOps Days Rockies. So, Mile High City, and hanging with the DevOps crew there. We'll be at PyCon the week after that. So I think we've got a fun stream in mind for next week that I'll be on the hook for that. And then, yep. And then DevX Conf, we're sponsoring that, which is the following week. We did that last year.
It's all going on then, isn't it?
Yeah. That's with GitPod, and that crew is super fun. So I'm excited for that. We're not speaking at that one this year, but they've been pumping that up. That's a great conference, and it's free, so people should sign up for that. And then DockerCon, and and I actually slotted in a talk myself at SlowConf this year. So people have met Kit on the stream. If you haven't signed up for SlowConf yet, make sure you do that. I'm talking about sort of using growth metrics as slows, or using slows as growth metrics to manage growth metrics. So not quite the technical talk that we usually get into here, but yeah, conference. We're just busy. So.
Well, indeed. And it's busy in chat. I'm just going to take this opportunity to welcome back Danny and Big Pod, who obviously works with us, and Eric goes by our podcast, and Mac and Paul, and who am I missing? Esme, welcome. It must be late where you are, but welcome back. And Gillian joins us, and also FX Boy. It's good to see you here. Thanks for stopping over here for a change. Right then. So, what have I been? I've been making Ubuntu Mate, the 2204 release, because yesterday it was the Ubuntu 2204 release day. This being a significant release because it's the next LTS. So this is, these are the versions of Ubuntu that people use, basically. The interims are kind of those sort of, development stepping stones. People do use them, but not in large numbers. But the LTSs are significant. So, I maintain one of the official desktop flavors. So that was released yesterday. And we thought it would be fun we say fun, interesting, to take a look at, let's try and build the same container image using 2004 and then 2204, and let's see how they differ. And we've got a number of tools at our disposal to do that. So, not least, of course, is the Slim.AI SaaS platform, which we'll be using for some graphical comparisons later. But there's also some tools from our friends Anchor, Syft Grype, and we're going to be using those as well to help find our way, because whilst I'm going to be doing this live, I did try and do a bit of due diligence earlier. So I know there's something to be discovered, although I did run into some technical difficulties, let's say. So what I really wanted to do was do all of this with Docker Desktop for Linux, which is in beta. And, well, it worked well to a point, and then I ran out of rope and it got complicated. So, rather at the last minute, I've had to sort of create an environment to do this, using projects that I've either created or co-authored. So I think that was a bit of karma coming back, to find that I'd got a tool belt. Rather handedly, I had a desktop operating system that I make, which I needed, and I have a hypervisor manager that I make, which I also needed, and then a new utility that I created that installs software for specifically Ubuntu from like GitHub releases, which is how I was easily able to get hold of things like the Docker engine and Syft and Grype and some other tools. So I was able to actually dig myself out of this hole. But I'm not as prepared as usual. So this is one of our classic, we're not quite sure how this is going to play out.
The chat knows these are always the best streams. I believe I saw somebody mentioning Q misbehavior from Martin in 321 from FX Boy. And I think that's what we're going to be seeing today. Thanks. Hi to Mindy, hi to O'Leary Crew, who's joining us. Great streamer of his own, and see Lindsay in the chat there. So, yeah, you've got a lot of eyes on you, Martin. Let's see where this one goes.
That's unfortunate because, no, it is fortunate. I tell you what, everyone pay attention. When I get it wrong or I overlook something, chime up with useful suggestions or questions about what I may have overlooked, because we are trying to sort of dig into this live. And I suppose I should start by moving to this view where I have some stuff set up. So this is a browser. We'll come back to that later. We shouldn't need to do anything in here just yet. So where shall I start?
As a quick aside, while you're getting set up, I'm excited for this one because it's in containers, and people know I'm not like the world's best Linux Ubuntu person, and I like nuke my desktop all the time, where I just have to like reinstall everything, and I have it on it, like anything I need is on a separate hard drive, because I just know at some point I'm gonna like nuke the OS. And doing it in containers, you don't really have to worry about these container updates, you do have to worry, and that's what we're gonna go into. It's not easy, but if you nuke the container, it's a little worse, not as bad as nuking your whole desktop.
In fact, as you say, nuking containers, I did in fact remove all the containers. I remember to do that. So the reason, so I'm actually, this terminal that you're looking at here is SSH into a virtual machine that I created earlier. And that's because Docker Desktop for Linux works like Docker Desktop for Mac and Windows, in that it's actually a VM with the containers running inside a VM. So it exposes that socket, which is terrific. But when it stops working, that's a problem, because you can't put Docker Desktop inside a VM. It doesn't work nested. So I'm just using plain old, Docker engine inside a virtual machine in order that I can actually do this. So I thought the first thing we should start with is, let's pull so Ubuntu 2004. This is the last LTS, so this is the LTS that was released 2 years ago. And over here we'll pull down not Docker Ubuntu 22.04, which is the release that came out yesterday. So once we've got both of those, we can do our first little look, which is, what's changed here. So if we just do Docker images, we can see that the last LTS was 72 megabytes and the new one is 77 megabytes. So really not that great a change in size. That's a 5 megabyte differential. And I was just curious, so what happens if we Docker pull Ubuntu 18.04, which is the LTS from 4 years ago.
Probably what my current desktop still is, I believe. So
right. And if we look at Docker images there, hello. Images. There we go. we can actually see there is a bit of a trend here that with each new LTS, things grow a little. But the question is, well, I wonder what those differences are. So that was the first thing, is this significant? Is this something new, interesting, or unusual? And so the way I thought we could have a look at that is if we go, so this is the Slim SaaS platform, and I added Ubuntu images as favorites in here. So if I take the 2204 release and then compare that with the 2004 release, we can see, well, how do these two images differ from one another? Now, obviously, there's going to be significant changes because it's like a whole 2 years have elapsed.
Right.
But this identifies like where the big changes are. And actually, when you look through here, it's not that significant. You know, on the face of it, this is showing the files that get added and removed. And it doesn't look all that interesting. But there's quite a lot to dig through here because you're basically comparing one operating system with another, and there's lots of these binary changes. So I was thinking, well, I wonder if there's another way we could like visualize what these differences are. So I thought we could use Syft. And if you're not familiar, Syft is a tool to we were using this just last week to generate a software bill of materials. But when you look at a base image, it's quite interesting. So if we do Ubuntu 2004 and we'll output that to Ubuntu, I'll call it by its name, vocal Syft.txt. So we'll just output all of that to a text file. We'll let that run. And whilst that's going, we'll do the same over here.
So this is basically what we were looking at last week, where we were kind of comparing Docker Slim xray to Syft, and the kind of differences in the outputs there, whereas Docker Slim xray is a little more kind of like layers and files and container construction, and Syft is the SBOM, like the list, the nutritional label for that container, what's inside of it. Just like the Docker desktop, the Slim platform's diff capability is basically diffing that xray file or that file system view of the container. Here we're going to be looking at two different software bill of materials, one for each container. Okay,
so the first thing, so I've created these two text files and this is going to be in table format, so we can do a direct sort of simple text comparison rather than trying to compare a load of JSON objects. And we can see immediately there are 92 packages in the old release and 101 packages in the new release. So if I flip over here, this is the same VM, but this is actually like the desktop. So if we use Meld, which is a graphical diff utility, not just for Linux, you can get it for other platforms too. But if we look at hang on, I called it Focal, didn't I? Focal Syft and Ubuntu Jammy Syft. So here's our graphical comparison, and we'll just say keep highlighting. Ooh, I wonder if I can make that bigger. I don't know that I can. Yes, I can. I can make that bigger. We will just go into the preferences. See, this is... Let's make that... There we go. There we go.
Podcast says he just installed Syft on his system. Yeah, it's a fun one to play around with for sure. And I know I owe our podcast some data, so you'll be getting some data, not just Docker Slim xray data, but I have a bunch of Syft data as well.
So we can see there's a lot of white space differences, and fair enough. But what we're looking for here is like areas of light blue in like the packages column. So we can see, for example, libpcap is a package that is now present, and it wasn't before, I don't think. No, it doesn't look like it was. So that's just one example. But here's a little chunk together. Look, we can see here there's this crypto library, which is different. So obviously something that's compiled that's in this base image has now got new requirements, or maybe there's a new utility. I'm not going to go over this with a fine-tooth comb, but you can see where there are some differences, and those have probably brought in additional libraries and what have you. So, and that's the extent of it. So user merge, this is an interesting one. If you're not familiar, user merge is the tool that actually collapses user bin to /bin, so everything appears in one spot now, and symlinks everything back. This is modern Linux is sort of collapsing those old-fashioned separations from the past. So anyway, we can see here not that much different, nothing significant, just some new libraries brought in, probably because of new dependencies. So reasonable enough. I think we can move on with that. So what I've got is one of our sample apps from the past. This is one of our Flask demo apps. It's like a Hello World Flask RESTful API. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's implemented in Python. And I've got two Docker files. I've just given them different names so I can do this, which is if I diff them, you can see the only thing that's different between these is that it's basically an 8-byte difference, a single byte difference, even 8 bits.
Literally just the base image.
Yeah, it's just that. So what we'll do is we'll build, let's try and build it with Docker. I don't know what Docker would produce. So we'll take our Docker file for focal, and we'll give this a tag, and this we'll call butler, and we'll tag it with focal as the name. So what have I missed? Oh, there we go. Let's do in fact, let's even try and hit the right buttons and everything. There we go. So we'll let that one build. It shouldn't take too long. So that's going to build our app in the container. So I can over here, we'll just take a look at that Docker file in its entirety. It's not anything you've not seen before. It's a base image. Do some updates, install some basic Python stuff, do some cleanup, drop our app into the container, run our app on a port using a non-privileged user. It's all the stuff you've seen here before when we've done our best practices pieces.
Well, while that's building, we've got a few comments in the chat that I think you might appreciate. So there's a little nostalgia going on for different versions of Ubuntu 16.04. Esme says, RIP Unity, or very adored by me, which I think is a hot take. And then FX Boy says, love me some meld for comparing config. And yeah, I hadn't seen meld before. Every time I watch you doing something in Linux, I'm like, is that just like a built-in Linux thing, or is that something that Martin has installed? So some love for meld. And then our podcast is saying that this is looking a bit like Git diffs, which is an interesting way to visualize these. And yeah, I think that was one of the goals from the Slim developer platform side, to be able to do a diff of, image metadata or the file system like you saw. I don't know of a good tool for diffing SBOMs. Maybe if somebody in the chat knows one, maybe someone at the Anchor team has built one, I don't know. But we were just diffing the kind of raw outputs there.
Yeah, I mean, you can output from Syft in multiple formats, one being, JSON. So I think it could be... I think it could be interesting to try and write something that actually does sort of a deeper analysis. Charafu says, I'm still waiting for the Nix stream. Yeah, I'd forgotten we'd touched on that. We did talk a little bit about it when I had George Castro on last year, but you're right, we totally need to do something specific to Nix.
You know what we need to do is connect with, because DevXConf, so I mentioned we're going to be at DevXConf. Jeff at GitPod is like a crazy Nix wizard.
Right.
And we should get him to come on and show us some of his Nix skills. I would love to. I want to learn more about Nix.
There we go, Charafu. We've got a solution to this. So I've now built the container using the jammy Dockerfile and the focal. So sorry I'm using the code names, but it's easier for me. So focal, it works alphabetically. So focal is the old release and jammy is the new release. And we can see here there's about a 30 megabyte difference between those two images. Which is interesting because we've already seen the base image isn't actually all that different. So where does that other like 25 megabytes come from? So we can do what we did earlier, which is bust out Syft again. And this time we'll call it Butler. And we'll look at the Butler focal image here.
Okay.
Now,
Butler is the name of your app, is
Butler's
that right?
effectively, yes. I've just called my app Butler. So that will run. Now, hang on a minute. Oh, look at that. I've put the wrong character in for the tag name. There we go. Right, so that will run. But Syft can interrogate not just the the deb packages in Ubuntu, but also things installed via pip or npm or ruby gems or insert name of language ecosystem package manager. So we'll do the same over here for the jammy image.
Yeah, we've got some guesses in chat already. Danny says, did you include -- no install recommends? Assuming that's on your Dockerfile. And FX Boy says the extra 25 megabytes is fortune lines.
So no, I did not exclude the recommends. So if we look at the Dockerfile for focal, because they're effectively the same. So we install CA certificates because you always need it with Python. We install Python minimal and pip, and we install pip so that we can run this down here and get the requirements for our app. Bearing in mind, so the Dockerfile is the same except for the base image it uses. And the requirements file is obviously the same because it's the same app. So that's interesting, and we'll see some of that now. So we processed interestingly 216 packages on the old release and 241 packages on the new release. Now there was already a slight delta, but that's like significantly more now.
Yeah, it's getting bigger. Yeah.
So let's head over to here. Here, there we go, and we'll do meld. That was a needless backtick, wasn't it? Right, let's do that, and let's do Butler and Jammy, and we'll keep highlighting. That'll just take a moment to figure out all the white spacing. So the first interesting thing is these packages at the top here are the ones that were installed via pip. So you can see here this is a Python package, and because it's using the same requirements file, these are all obviously the same versions of things because that's just what Python requirements does. So that's expected. So the only differences then are what got installed when we said give me Python, give me Python 3 and give me pip. So when we start looking down the list here again, we're looking for sort of large chunks of blue, and this is interesting immediately. So I see there's a fonts package. Now fonts generally are relatively large, but also that gives us a clue as to what's going on here, because if it needs fonts, then something graphical somewhere got thrown into the mix. So we can see here newer versions of GCC versus older versions. This is to be expected because obviously, the tooling and user space has been uplifted. But what I'm looking for is something that should indicate new dependencies got brought in. Here's libfonc config again.
Yeah. FX Boy says he's heading out, but before he says anything more disruptive, he wants you to remind you to behave yourself. So.
I will behave myself, I promise. And here we go. So libgd is a graphics tool.
Yep.
And then here's where it starts to open up. Here we go. This here, these are all JPEG libraries. So that, and which don't exist over here. We already know about this crypto library. We saw that before.
Yep.
So here, Sphinx doc. So I think what's happening is there's now a dependency on Sphinx, the documentation generator for Python, as part of Python minimal. And in turn, that pulls in a bunch of fonts. And now we can see some graphics libraries there. And I imagine there'll be others because there we go. Here's libpng. So what we're able to determine here is a fundamental requirement change in Python, and that's what's uplifted the size of our container. Now,
interesting.
And Pogates is saying, Docker pull Python. We're deliberately doing this with Ubuntu today, but yes, this container was originally using the Python Slim 396 or something. But we're deliberately doing this with Ubuntu to have a look at, because one of the things is if you want to stay ahead of the technical debt curve, you might want to start looking at whether you can deploy your applications in fresher containers. And we'll look at some of that in just a moment, because there's another angle on all of this. So I think we've unraveled it. I think as we look down here we go. There's another graphics library. And here's part of the X protocols and more graphics libraries. Again, those will be dependencies pulled in by Sphinx. So that's why our container is bigger. So I think that mystery is solved. Is that a
decision that would be made by Python, or would that come from Ubuntu? Is that because Pogati mentions the Python image, which I know has the latest one has things like image magic and stuff like that. Those are decisions made by the Python community. So is that coming from Python, or would that be related to sort of the Ubuntu update?
So I'm just looking at the Python 3 minimal package here. Here it is. This is the new one in Jammy, and this is a package that is not inherited directly by from Debian. So I happen to know, I know Mateus. So this is a package that's maintained by the Ubuntu Foundations team. And it may well be that they've based it on changes in Debian. But what will have happened is this package now has a requirement on Sphinx. It probably won't be this. It will be one of the things that it depends upon. Pre-depends on this package here. Let's see. And that recommends this one. So now we're chasing the eventually we'll unearth one of these that will tell us.
And this is why supply chain security is a hard problem to solve.
Indeed. So we can keep going down that path. But I think we've identified why there's that uplift. It's because there's some extra stuff that the minimum Python now requires. So what I thought would be interesting.
We got one question, which is, I wonder what installing the apt packages without recommended packages will do dependency wise.
Well, we could try that in a bit if you like. We'll do this, and then we'll circle back. In fact, let's do it now. Let's do Dockerfile focal apt install no install recommends. I think that will do what we need, and we'll do the same. In fact, we can get that one off running, can't we, whilst we're focal. Let's call this Dockerfile focal I'll call it no rec. There we go. And we'll make the same change to the jammy. In fact, this will be interesting because there's another little bit of analysis we can, another comparison we can do as a result of this. So let's do that, and let's do this, and we'll build the jammy version. And
so it sounds like our podcasts in Big Pod are well on their way to creating something of a package managed comparison app that they're just product ideating in chat. So it all started here. When their startup is worth $100 million, they can point back to the Slim.AI Twitch stream as to where that idea got kicked off. So
this is the great thing about being an ideas man. You just have to come up with the ideas, and somebody else can do the hard work of actually turning the idea into reality. So
entrepreneurship.
Let's just get rid of that. Let's take a look and see what that did to our container sizes. So if we look at our Docker images, these no-rec images are indeed considerably smaller, but nevertheless, our Alexa, stop! Oh my goodness, our
Alexa, order 800 cans of cat food. No, sorry.
So now the difference is down to about 11 megabytes.
Alexa,
yours
stop.
is off.
I forgot I had Alexa. And that's how I got 800 cans of cat food.
So there we go. So now we're down to an 11 megabyte difference between those two containers, comparing old and new. And we know that 5 megabytes of that comes from the base image. So there's now only a 6 megabyte differential. So yes, there's a nice way to actually keep your container image sizes down, without having to pull in a load of unnecessary stuff. I'm not going to do. I tell you what, I'll after the fact, I'll put these Docker files in our Discord. You can find the links to the Discord at the URL above my head, and you can do the comparison to see if you do know recommends, what's the difference, and I'll be interested to see responses from what people discover, what was actually missing.
Yeah. It's interesting because it does remind me, I mentioned the DockerCon lightning talk that we have with PaymentWorks, where they actually used our Docker desktop extension to do all of this locally, which, you can do diffs locally and comparisons of your containers. And they had, what their use case was, not to tip it off, but they had made a mistake in caching some information that they shouldn't have been caching. And they were able to use that diff to kind of like walk through the layers and look at file sizes and eventually figure out that, there's a folder over here that's just a bunch of cached data that I just really should have removed from my container, but I didn't.
Right.
And, doing that, they cut 200 megabytes out of their container and stuff like that. So it is useful to go through and do this and sort of understand, maybe you missed a flag somewhere. Maybe, there's some, virtual environment that's getting moved over that shouldn't be, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Or in fact, we in air quotes, made this mistake when we were working on one of our demos, and we left a Postgres database inside our container. So you were just talking about, looking at the layers. Docker Slim xray is the tool you can use to do that. So I'll just run that a couple of times quickly. I did have some notes for this one, so I can just copy and paste. Cool. So there we go. Docker Slim xray, the name of the container image you want to look at, and then I'm just sending everything to the output. And then if I actually just come over here, let's take a look at that last one I did. Here we go. This is the long one. So now with this, you can see the layer construction, the sizes. Now this is all machine readable. It's not human friendly, which is why I'm going to spend almost no time looking at this, because what we'll do is we'll look at this in the SaaS platform in a bit, and we'll get much more interesting, useful visualization of those comparisons. But why are we doing this? One of the reasons why I'm doing this comparison of 2004 to 2204 is one of the things that we've talked about here before is technical debt. And you know, when we had Kit on, he talked about using slows to combat technical debt in a really articulate way. So if you head over to our YouTube channel, again, you'll find the links in the URL above my head. There's a great presentation. Well, it was a talk like this. It wasn't a presentation. It was a conversation. And we got into this whole discussion about how slows can be the friend of developers to help right size the effort that you put in places, particularly around tech debt. So I'm doing this because I want to be a tech debt warrior. I don't want to be the DevOps team that are still shipping containers or VMs or apps built around Ubuntu 12.04. You know, that's a bad place to find yourself in. Canonical will still sell you support for 12.04, but you know, you're in a sticky position. So a day after release, good time to start looking on a Friday at how do things differ. So one of the other things I thought I'd look at is like a security analysis of these containers. So another tool that's produced by Anchor is Grype. So it works a lot like Syft. We'll do Ubuntu 20.04. So I'm actually going to look at the base image here. We'll do one on this side and we'll do the other on not Syft, it's Grype this time.
Now this is a vulnerability scanner similar to SNCC and Trivy and these other, obviously they all have a little bit of a different flavor in the way they work and do this. Grype is a cool one because it's open source. I've played around with it a bunch in addition to Syft. So, but it'll give a readout of all of the vulnerabilities. So here we see the CVEs listed out on the right side. And yeah, okay, cool, nice. Oh my gosh, it had no vulnerabilities. 2204 has no.
Well, it was out yesterday. I mean, this is what you'd like to see, really, isn't it?
Well, so. Yeah, yeah, okay, fair point. I can't. I mean, outside of like times when I've used Docker Slim and it's like, you know, on like a Hello World app, I can't think of a time I've like seen a container with zero vulnerabilities. I obviously don't work in production. Other people have definitely seen that, but I'm just surprised.
Now, what I will say is I did test this earlier using obviously Grype and Trivy and Docker Scan, which uses SNCC as its engine. And I did get consistent results across all three, which is obviously good. That gives you some confidence that they're all doing the right thing. But the reason why I used this is this highlighted something interesting, which was this one here. And I was like, right, it knows there's this low risk vulnerability in Bash, the shell. We'll come back to just put a pin in Bash for a moment. But it tells us here what version it's fixed in. So it's obviously a point release that carries this fix. And I was thinking, well, I'm using a container that is just a few hours old. Why don't I have this fix already? So I headed over to Launchpad, which is where Ubuntu development takes place, to take a look at the bash package in Ubuntu. And this page here shows us some history. So we can see that the version in 2204 is significantly newer than the one in Focal. And what we can actually see here is, if you look, this package carrying the fixes is in the security updates pocket, and it's dated 2 days ago. And what I haven't got in my Dockerfile, which this highlighted for me, is I do an update, but I don't actually do an upgrade. So
interesting.
If I had included the upgrade step in my preparation there, it would have pulled in that fix, and there would have been one fewer vulnerabilities in the 2004 container.
Oh,
So yeah, this I found this kind of interesting because I've never actually
yeah,
sat down and done like an objective side by side comparison in
yeah,
this way. So I thought that was interesting. But obviously, the most interesting thing at all is that here you're starting with a base image with no
yeah,
vulnerabilities whatsoever, which is obviously a great place to be. Now,
yeah.
when we
That's kind of
talk
what
about
BigPod
Bash,
brings up in the yeah,
go on.
BigPod brings up in the chat. Most of the packages are quite new, so vulnerabilities may not have been found. Um, and it is interesting for me, though, just as somebody who, has been learning containers kind of in depth for about a year now, so early on, people I read advice that was like, don't do apt-get update and apt-get upgrade, because then that's going to, you're not going to be reproducible anymore. It's not going to be the same container image that you're building all the time. But then there's always that trade-off for the security, you're not going to be picking up security fixes. And
Yeah.
I actually had never seen it quite in that like crystal clear, like this is the difference in doing that versus not doing that. So that's a really cool example.
Now, we could also say that this is like a moot point, because in a minute we're going to minimize these containers with Docker Slim. And one of the things that's going to happen is all of the shells are going to get ejected from the minimized container image. So it actually doesn't matter, because, we're container optimization nerds, and we know that's going to get thrown away. I was surprised at how many. We recently did a Twitter poll. How many shells do you think you'll find on average? We'll look at that later, because that was also surprising in this particular image, just how many shells exist, excluding Python, of course, which technically a kind of shell. Right. So let's do what I just said. Let's minimize our containers. So we just to remind ourselves, we've got these are the two containers that we're going to minimize. We're going to start with the big ones, right? The ones that include all of the dependencies, which are 30 megabytes adrift. So let me just go and grab from my notes, save me having to remember the incantations. Yeah, because what we'll do here is this. So we're going to run, I do believe I've installed Docker Slim in this VM. So we're going to run Docker Slim with a build. The HTTP probe command, I'm just including by way of demonstration that you can coerce Docker Slim to go and poke particular URLs. And we're going to call this Focal Slim, and we're going to derive it from Butler Focal. So we'll let that run and do its thing.
Okay. So now you're doing Docker Slim build on our containers, and hopefully that'll remove a bunch of stuff.
It should remove quite a bit, I would hope. I mean, we usually see between 10 and 30 times size reduction when we do this. So I would now go and do exactly the same thing on the Jammy container.
And as you do that, Danny and BigPod are kind of talking about reproducible builds, and containers are very short-lived. BigPod brings up, so are reproducible builds that important? Of course, you're going to certify them every time you create a new one anyway. So including that update is good. And Danny says, in my opinion, if you want a reproducible container, then you should roll your own base image,
right?
And manually bump that container, which is kind of in the theme that we're looking at today, which is like container or base image upgrades. Like how do those work? What should you be looking for? So, yep.
And I think for container images, reproducible builds, I think mean something different from reproducible builds when you're talking about binary artifacts in the core of an operating system, for example. And I would agree that it's not so important to have 100% reproducibility in terms of actual reproducible builds for containers. You want reproducible results, I think is probably more important. Let's have a look at our Docker images. So we have got here our Focal Slim and Jammy Slim, and they are now 2 megabytes different in size. So I think what we're seeing here, we'll have to go and look, but I think what we're seeing here is probably the difference between Python 3.8 and Python 3.10, and it just being a little bit bigger. Now, unfortunately, as things stand today, we can't use Syft to go and prove that, because in the process of minimizing this container, we've ejected all of the package metadata from the container as well. So tools like Syft and Grype won't work at this point, which is why what you should do is you should do your SBOM analysis and your security scans prior to minimizing your containers, or maybe a tutorial for a future date. When you minimize with Docker Slim, define some include paths to keep all of the package metadata intact, so you can still run those tools on a minimized container, even though it's not as minimized as it could be. So that's something I've thought about but never done, but I think that would be a fun topic for another day. Is let's try and retain package metadata in an optimized container so we can still analyze it.
Yeah, I think artifact management and kind of like SBOM and like what's in my container management from a a Slim perspective is kind of an interesting topic to look at some point. I know Grype will work on Slim containers. I've done it before. The SBOMs I do believe do not work, but it kind of varies by scanner. It varies by like which container scanner you're using and stuff like that. So, and I know that was in some of that CNCF guidance on container slimming that came out back last May. So yeah, that might be a good topic for us to jump into at some point.
And I thought I hadn't planned to do this, but as we're at this place, I'll just minimize those versions of the containers that didn't have any recommended packages inside them. I am going to predict these will be exactly the same size as the other Slim containers, because Docker Slim should analyze and see the same things that were required to run the app, and everything else should be thrown away. So let's see if I'm right about that. This could be an embarrassing moment. Hold on. Hold on, let's see what happens. So Docker images, and thankfully they are indeed. There's 100 megabytes difference over here. I'm going to call that around. I'm going to call that a rounding error.
Yeah.
So yeah, that, not surprised. And so Danny suggested doing this, and certainly if this is the container artifact that you're working with, that's a significant saving on its own. But when you put these things into production, strip out everything you can, but more importantly, maybe you want these fatter containers here in your dev workflow because you've instrumented them with developer tooling, and you want all of that stuff around. And then when it's time to go into production, you don't need to worry about the intricacies of package management of the OS. You can just go straight to slimming and get the same results from initially large containers.
Yep. Say welcome to Danny Baldu. We have two Dannys in the chat now, so we'll Danny 1 and Danny 2 maybe we'll refer to you, but and then I think our podcast has famous last words. I think that was responding to strip this stuff out before you send things to production, but maybe that was referencing something else that we were doing. So.
Right then, so let's take a look over here. Let's go back to the portal. So earlier on, I published containers to Dockerhub. And if I go to my favorites, we should be able to find his Butler. So this is the large container built on 2204, and then these are the Slim containers. So I thought I'd start we'll just take this one by way of example. So we'll just look here, because what we can see here is the layer construction of our container. So we'll just look at this in case you've never seen this before. This is a useful little bit of tooling. This is obviously a larger container, so it takes a little bit longer to actually do the analysis. You'll notice that the Slim ones processed a lot faster because they're 10, 20 times smaller.
Yep. So Danny 2's asking, what are we doing? So so we're Slim.AI. We're a company that's built on the Docker Slim open source project. And so we do a lot of work with kind of containers and container optimization, working with applications and containers. And what we're playing around with today is the Ubuntu 22.04 release, which just came out yesterday. And we are comparing that to the Ubuntu 20.04 container and seeing what the difference is between them. So what Martin has been doing is putting an app in the container and doing a build and then using some tools to compare the difference between the two. What we were just looking at was the Slim.AI platform, where we can do deep dive container analysis and insights for a container, and we can do diffs between two different containers. So seeing what the difference between two container images are. So that gets you a little caught up, and we talk a lot on this stream about containers, container optimization. We occasionally wear pirate costumes. We occasionally drink tea and eat cookies. Other than that, that's the stream. That's the whole stream. So
this shows our layer analysis of the original container. We can see we've got 4 layers. That is the OS layer 0 right here. So we can actually see like how these layers stack upon each other. So that is the layer 2. This is where I installed Python. So you know, it has a run command that installed Python. This is where the app directory gets created, and then this is where our app actually gets deposited. So there we go. And then the last layer is probably the requirements being processed. Yeah, looks like it, doesn't it? So that's the container image there. And then what did I want to look at? Overview. We were talking about shells earlier. Let's take a look here. So there we go. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shells. No, 6 shells in that, you know, sort of unoptimized container. But some of these are symlinks, in fact, so it's not quite,
I think there's a couple
not quite
in there,
it seems to be.
So that's the 3 that we typically see, right? The dash, the bash, and the bourne shell.
Yeah. So now what we'll do is we've got these 2 containers that are the same app built in this with this effectively the same Dockerfile. Or only thing changing is that base image from Ubuntu 20.04 to 22.04. So let's take a look at. I think we'll look at the Slim containers. Actually, this is where it's going to be more interesting, isn't it? So let's compare that one.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious what those. You think those 2 megabyte difference between the 2 containers was just the difference between Python 3.8 and Python 3.10?
That would be my guess. But, you know, we're used to living in an age where you would guess. You know, we've now got tools at our disposal which can take the guesswork out of that. So let's have a look.
Right.
So here's the file system diff. Certainly here's some okay, so we're going to see some cert differences. The certs are small, they compress well. I'm just going to collapse that because did not mean to do that.
But here we're seeing that Python 3.8 is actually not in the 22.04 container. It is in the 20.04 container.
Yeah. So we can see these differences. Yes, we can see the change of Python 3.8's gone. Some changes in, and then here we go. Here we see all of the Python 3.10. This is the Python bytecode for, you know, whatever our application needed to do, which has been preserved in our optimized container because it was required to run the application. I mean, technically, if you wanted to, you could strip these out and it would, you know, regenerate them on first run, but that comes with some performance penalty. And if startup and deployment times are important to you, then keeping that bytecode around is advantageous. So far, all of this is Python stuff. Definitely references to 3.10 in there. We could be scrolling for days. For days. There's some shared objects for various bits of the core Python.
Is there anything, and I don't want to take you out of your scrolling here, but is there anything in the image metadata diff that like is obvious? Differences, obviously some differences in names, slight difference in size.
So curiously, there are fewer binaries, but they are larger. So that does account for our difference there. There is our 2 megabytes. Look, so the binaries that we are including are just bigger because 2 years have elapsed and new features have landed probably. So I think that, I mean, look, the text file size is only 100 meg, so really nothing in it.
Okay.
So I think we've identified that it is in fact, just that change, because all that's left really is enough Python to run our application, and there's a difference between 3.8 and 3.10. I mean, I won't get into this. I was just thinking of another experiment, but I think that would take too long.
Right.
So what have I missed in the diff comparisons? Anything else I could look at?
I can't think of anything unless, I mean, there shouldn't be anything between the Dockerfile diff other than the application code that's being added there. So, I can't think so. Unless you went to, I guess one hot idea here is if you went to the file system diff again and you filtered over there where it says 1,000 or 1,600 objects in that filter dropdown.
Yep.
And you do just the ones that were, maybe just binary additions, maybe is kind of what I'm thinking. Like, is there anything that got added there that is like reasonably large or somewhere in that 2 megabytes? I guess it's all in that user folder. And there's 15.
Yeah, it's all Python 3.10. Look.
It's all there, So it is all those Python 3.10 dependencies. So that is correct. And looking at those folder size, the sizes of those folders is usually a pretty good indicator of like where things are changing and bloating or getting added. So cool.
And for anyone that's not seen how Docker Slim works, you're probably looking at this Dockerfile thinking, hang on a minute, that's a bit odd. And that's because what Docker Slim does is it spits out a single layer image, which is the optimized image, which is why we don't see all of the detail that you would expect to see in a normal container. Right. Is that everything I was going to look at? I think it was. I mean, I didn't run my application except for when it was being slimmed, but it does work. It did work before and after when I tested it earlier.
We'll take your word for it. I didn't want to ask about the no recommended packages. Wanted to see if that one would work still. But
no, it must have worked because it was slimmed and it would have been observed by Docker Slim. It had to have run in order to slim it successfully. So I think it did. Should we find out for reals if it actually?
I'll take your word for it. I think, and that's how we sat on stream for 4 hours debugging.
We don't want it to be an all-nighter, but I found that. I don't know what does the chat think. I thought that was interesting. I found some things I didn't expect to learn along the way. Particularly around the security analysis. I was as surprised as you that it got a completely clean bill of health in the new release, because the archive gets frozen in Ubuntu some weeks before, and although security patches still land and what have you, I'm surprised at like all those low risk vulnerabilities that are simply not significant enough that they're never going to get addressed in the LTS.
Right.
But then I would have I expected there may be one or two of those like as a hangover in the new release, but no, all good.
Kudos to the Ubuntu team that put that out. I mean, that's really great to see, and you just don't honestly, I was very surprised. You just don't see that very often with container images when you scan them, and to know that you had consistent results from Grype and Trivy and Snick, who are, all take different approaches to sort of how they scan for vulnerabilities. That's just a really great vote of confidence for this release. So cool. All right. Well, I am convinced. I will update my desktop to 2204 and Ubuntu Mate finally, because I'm overdue in doing that. Yeah.
Oh, one more of them. One more of us even.
Yeah. Then I can just file bugs for you whenever I find them.
I love that. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
That's my favorite thing in the world when people file bugs.
Yeah, you can usually just pass back at me and say, Pete, you're just using it wrong. So, but yeah, I did think that was really interesting. I think we learned a lot of stuff. I mean, we saw sort of being able to diff containers at the very beginning to understand the differences in the base images. We saw using Syft to understand the packages that are inside of them. We really dove into and saw a really clean example of why you would use, apt update, apt upgrade to have a better security posture, but at the trade-off of, knowing that exactly that container could change underneath you. And then, we ran through all of the Docker Slim minification and how you would diff those two containers. So yeah, I thought really interesting stream. Great job. So cool. And we have a bunch of old friends here too. French guy Yannick's here, and haven't seen him in a bit. So hello to you,
Yannick.
And and a few new folks too. So if you guys like the stream and you enjoyed this, give us a follow. We stream every Thursday usually, though schedules have been a little off. And then we'll be back next week talking about a Python. I'll tip my hand on this. I'm a little nervous to do this one because I haven't used this app in a while, but back when I was starting at Slim, I wrote in Python a Scotch recommendation app, and it uses some data science, some scikit-learn. Our podcast can tell me if I'm doing the recommendations right, but to compare different types of Scotch. Now, I don't drink Scotch anymore, so I won't be able to have a Scotch while I present it, but it's a great data science problem, and I've put it in a container and used Docker Slim to slim it. And I just think it's a fun Python example that we can walk through next week. So we'll do that for PyCon next week.
So Pete, lemon tea is a convincing replacement for Scotch in a tumbler. So.
Okay. All right. So I will bring lemon tea next week and say it's Scotch, and you guys can know. But
I'll also bring some lemon tea.
There you go. That sounds
right.
Good. The chat is welcome to bring their own lemon tea to.
I am going to head to the Discord channel. Find the links above my head. After this, I'll share the Docker file that we were just using. And if anyone's got any additional questions or some commentary that we may have missed whilst we were streaming, it's always difficult to stay on top of things. Then hop over there and we'll field any questions that anyone might have.
Yeah, and in prep for the stream, feel free to share your favorite variety of lemon tea with us, and we will see if that will work in the recommendation engine. Yannick says Long Island lemon tea.
Oh, Long Island lemon tea. Yeah, Yannick knows me well. He knows that I would have the iced variety of that Long Island tea. But yes,
I've heard that this is a favorite of some of the folks in your world. So nice.
Right then.
All right.
Well, thank you all for coming. I hope to see you in the Discord channel momentarily. And if not, we will catch you next week when we'll be doing recommendations of lemon tea and other assorted beverages from Scotland.
All right. Wonderful. Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye for now.